Think about it this way. If a man is out here dating someone like Amber Rose, what are you really expecting from him at that point? That context matters. Here's something that isn't exactly a secret. Wealthy men have a well-documented pattern of dating younger women. Not always dramatically younger, but younger nonetheless. And while that's nothing new, it has become a genuine point of concern within certain communities, specifically among women in the sprinkle space, who are actively seeking older, financially established men to build a life with. The issue is that this desire isn't exclusive to women in their 20s. Women over 40 are in that same conversation, chasing the same pool of high-value men that younger women are also competing for. And that creates a very real and uncomfortable dynamic that doesn't get addressed honestly enough. This exact question was recently brought to Shira 7, and what she had to say about it is worth paying attention to.
A woman over 40 instead of a woman in her 20s because he doesn't like the same music, he's going to look like he's paying for her, and they have nothing to really discuss.
So the point being made here is that there are older, wealthy men out there who genuinely prefer women closer to their own age, simply because they struggle to relate to younger women on a deeper level. There's a generational gap in references, experiences, and perspective that can make those connections feel surface level. And that's essentially the foundation of the argument, that older women still have a real shot in this space. But let's be straightforward about something. While it's absolutely true that some older men prefer a woman their own age, the reality of male and female dynamics adds another layer to this conversation. Men and women are fundamentally wired differently. You can absolutely hold a conversation, find common ground, and enjoy each other's company, but there's also a well-known pattern where those differences eventually create friction. Topics that feel natural between two men or two women don't always translate the same way across gender lines. And that's not an attack on anyone. It's just an honest observation about how communication tends to play out. So when you factor that in, age becomes less of the deciding variable than people assume. Sometimes the age gap matters enormously. Other times it's almost irrelevant, because the core dynamic between men and women exists regardless of whether she's 25 or 45. But then she went on to add something else worth considering.
He wants a companion and a relationship with someone on his own intellectual level, and he can impress a 40-year-old. That's who he will deal with. If he cannot impress a 40-year-old, he can't do nothing for her financially. He's going to go for the 20-something-year-old. Why? Because he can impress her easier, he can spend less money on her, and he can be the intellectual superior to her.
And then this take entered the conversation. The claim that the only reason an older, successful man would pursue a younger woman is because he simply can't impress a woman his own age. Let's be honest about that argument. It doesn't hold up. The idea that a wealthy, established, successful man is out here chasing younger women because he feels inadequate around older ones completely misreads how that dynamic actually works. Men who have built real money and real success are not operating from a place of insecurity when it comes to dating. If anything, they have more options than the women who are actively seeking them out. The power in that equation doesn't lean the way that argument suggests. What that framing is essentially doing is painting older men who choose not to date women their own age as somehow incompetent or less than. But here's where the double standard becomes hard to ignore, because when older women date significantly younger men, that same energy rarely gets applied. Nobody's questioning their confidence or implying they couldn't attract someone their own age. The criticism only seems to travel in one direction. Which brings us to Amber Rose, who recently appeared on the Ball in the Family podcast with Lonzo and LiAngelo Ball. The conversation covered a lot of ground, but the part worth focusing on here is her very open and straightforward admission that she now exclusively dates younger men. And when one of the brothers asked her directly what she's actually looking for in a relationship,
Dating Amber Rose, like, what are your expectations for him?
I want vulnerability.
I want honesty. We have to have sex at least 5 days a week, minimum.
Now, some important context here. This is a woman who was dated and been around serious wealth for most of her adult life. She was with Kanye West in the mid-2000s. She married Wiz Khalifa. She was in a relationship with 21 Savage. These are not men who were struggling financially. And now, in her late 40s, she's sitting across from these guys saying that money isn't really at the top of her priority list anymore. And that's an interesting shift. But it also makes sense when you consider that Amber Rose has built her own financial foundation at this point. When you've already secured your own bag, you can afford to prioritize other things. But then she mentioned wanting to have sex at least 5 times a week. And that detail is very telling when you think about who that preference is actually aimed at. That's not a random number. Framing intimacy that way is essentially a signal, and it's pointed directly at a younger man. Not because men in their 40s or 50s can't keep up, because plenty of them absolutely can, but the way that expectation is packaged and presented reads as a clear nod towards someone in his 20s or early 30s, someone in the peak of his physical prime. She's not just saying what she wants, she's signaling who she wants.
Not money like that, but I still want to keep it like exciting. You know, I want it to be like, hey, I'm coming to pick you up. Let's go to Wendy's. I don't care where we
Wendy's?
go. I don't care where we go. I don't care where we go.
So you're not like I
I'll
gotta
sit
go
in
to
the,
Nobu.
not like Nobu, but like I'm down for Wendy's too. And I'll sit in the car with you and we'll eat Wendy's together and talk and listen to slow jams and then go home and like have fun.
And here's another thing worth pointing out. Nobody in that conversation brought up money. Nobody asked her about finances or what she requires from a man financially. She volunteered that information herself, unprompted. She put it out there on her own that money isn't something she's focused on anymore, that she's willing to be flexible, low maintenance, go with the flow, sit in the car, whatever it takes. But let's put that in perspective. Back when she was in her prime and had her pick of the room, the men she chose were all financially loaded. Kanye West had the bag. Wiz Khalifa had the bag. Every significant man she was connected to during that era was sitting on serious money. So the idea that finances were never a factor doesn't quite line up with the pattern. It's very easy to say money doesn't matter once you've already spent years around it, once you've built your own, and once the type of men willing to spend it on you have shifted. The flexibility she's describing now tells a very different story than the choices she was making 10 or 15 years ago. And then, this next part is actually hilarious.
So, because it's like, I'm not going to Cheesecake Factory. And if I'm going to Cheesecake Factory, your dusty ass can go to Cheesecake Factory.
Exactly.
I'm down for Cheesecake Factory.
They got some great food.
Hey, cheesecake
That's
factory
crazy.
solid.
I want Denny. I want the, what's the slam, the Grand Slam. I want the whole thing, bro.
And then she went in a direction nobody really expected. She started taking shots at younger women who say they wouldn't go on a date to the Cheesecake Factory. Her point being, if she's willing to go, why aren't they? On the surface, that sounds reasonable. The Cheesecake Factory is genuinely a solid restaurant. But here's the thing. This is Amber Rose we're talking about. A celebrity with her history, her profile, and her background. The expectation would naturally be that her standards sit a little higher than that. So hearing her use that as a flex lands a little differently than she probably intended. But then came the most revealing moment of the entire interview. She openly admitted that at 42, the only men who actually approach her are in their early 20s, 22, 23, 24 years old. And older men simply don't come around. They don't pursue her, they don't express interest. She said it herself, almost matter-of-factly. She can't seem to attract an older man no matter what. And that admission is really the heart of this whole conversation. Now, to be clear, Amber Rose is still a very attractive woman. She looks better than the vast majority of women out there. But attraction is only one piece of the equation. When you factor in her full public history, the slut walk era, the shift toward MAGA politics, the string of very public and messy relationship endings, even her own comment under Megan Thee Stallion's post after the Klay Thompson breakup, where she says she can't keep a man either. All of that adds up to a very specific reputation.
And that reputation has a cost. Because when a man reaches a certain level of success and financial stability, particularly in his 30s and 40s, he starts making very calculated decisions about who he gives his time and energy to. He's not just thinking about attraction anymore. He's thinking about peace, compatibility, and whether a woman's presence adds value or creates chaos. And if he already knows the full story, if he's already seen the pattern, he's likely gonna keep moving, not because she isn't beautiful, but because the emotional and mental overhead of dealing with that history is simply too expensive. He has options, and he knows it. That's something a lot of women in their 40s don't fully account for. Because at the same time that women in that age range are often raising their standards and demanding more, men in that same window are quietly hitting their stride. Financially more stable, emotionally more grounded, more selective, and far less reactive than they were in their 20s. A man in his late 30s or 40s who has built something real is not looking for a project. He's looking for someone who fits seamlessly into the life he's constructed. And there are plenty of men, more than people realize, who have simply opted out of the entire dynamic altogether, working hard, saving up, and spending their time in places where they feel the energy is different. Brazil, Colombia, the Dominican Republic, across Africa. Not because they hate anyone, but because they've decided the friction isn't worth it. What Amber Rose is experiencing right now is the reality of that shift. She knows she still looks good. People tell her constantly. But the men with the resources and the options aren't checking for her the way they once did. So the younger guys who will, that's who she's left working with. And to keep them around, she's had to quietly lower the bar. The woman who once moved in circles where 7 figures was the baseline is now saying money doesn't matter, and she's cool with keeping it simple. That's not growth, that's adjustment. And it happens when the things that made you competitive start to fade and nothing else has been built to replace them. Looks have a shelf life, that's just the truth. And if the only thing you brought to the table was your appearance, eventually you're going to find yourself in a very uncomfortable negotiation. If you want access to successful, established men, you have to figure out what those men actually value and be able to deliver it consistently. If you can't, the options narrow fast. Nobody wants to wake up at 40-something, dating someone 15 years younger and quietly covering all the bills. But that's exactly where the road leads when the work doesn't get done early enough. Amber Rose in 2015 was still very much in the conversation. In her 30s, still at the top of her visibility, still commanding attention. That was 11 years ago. The young women who were teenagers back then are now in their mid-20s, and the successful men in their 30s and 40s are looking in that direction. That's just the cycle. The lesson here, and this is for the women paying attention, is to watch what's happening and learn from it before you're in the same position. Look at how the shift happens in real time, because at some point, the goalpost moves whether you're ready or not. The women who come out ahead are the ones who built something beyond their looks long before it became necessary. All right, guys, that's going to do it for this one. Appreciate you all for rocking with the channel. Make sure you hit that notification bell so you never miss an upload. Until next time, we're out.